I think the most trouble I got into was when I was in high school. Um, I thought I had permission to take my dad's truck, and go on go on a date. And when I got back, while he was waiting for me, he said, "You didn't ask me if you could take the truck tonight." And so I had to turn in my keys to him for 2 weeks, and I couldn't use the truck anymore. I didn't. When I first took your grandma out on dates, I would take her out in our 2-ton 1947 Chevrolet truck, and that was my date vehicle. My dad let me drive the truck because I drove it around the farm and I drove it to town, took feed to the mill and that kind of thing. So he took my keys for 2 weeks, and I remember that. I was out of commission for a couple weeks, mm-hmm. And so. But as far as being in trouble, I don't know, I just never caused my folks any trouble. I guess I was afraid of being heavily disciplined, so I just decided it wasn't worth it.
Did you ever get grounded or get detentions in school or anything?
I got, I can't recall ever getting detention in school. I had to be, you see, when I was going to high school, I had to be up in the morning and get the cattle ready, and I was up pretty early in the morning, most of the time at least by 5 o'clock in the morning, to get done with the cattle, because I milked the cows and took care of the cattle and cleaned the barns and did everything before I went to school when I was in high school. So I had to be up early, and then I rode the bus until I got my car. And I told you the story about getting my car because I told my dad I wasn't just gonna. I said I was either going to quit school or quit Darien, and he decided that quitting school was not a good idea, and quitting Darien wasn't either. So we went and got a car. But when I was when I was in school, I just was pretty careful not to get in any trouble, because I couldn't be in detention after school because I had to be home and milk the cows at night. So I had to get on the bus at night. So I don't know whether it was a combination of being scared of not being able to catch the bus or being scared of what I would get when I got home. So I guess probably the combination of the two was sufficient to keep me out of trouble.
Whatever it was, it worked.
Whatever it was, it worked,
Yeah.
So I just never got in trouble, I can't ever recall being in trouble. I obviously got my share of discipline and I got my share of comeuppance, but nothing really serious. My dad was a pretty strong disciplinarian, and he didn't put up with much fooling around. He wanted you to toe the mark. And I probably did some things like every young man does that would not pass muster if my dad knew about it. Every kid goes through that. They do some things that, I think I'll just keep this to myself,
Yeah.
So I'm sure there was quite a number of those, but, I don't know that there's any that are noteworthy and putting out to publication, But I just didn't, I didn't really give the school teachers much trouble, and I was on pretty good terms with the professor that headed the school principal, because he was my speech teacher, and he thought I was a pretty good guy, and so I didn't have much trouble with him at all, But I didn't really give him reason to try to get me in trouble,
Yeah.
I wasn't looking around for ways to create problems, that was kind of a waste of time in my book. So,
Well, let's talk about some world events. Maybe we'll start older and come to more recent events.
okay.
Uh, so, what?
Well, I remember. I'll remember when World War II started, when they bombed Pearl Harbor.
How old were you then?
7 years old.
So, what do you remember about it?
I was on my coaster wagon up in Minneapolis on a Sunday morning. That Sunday morning that they bombed, I think I was 7. Yeah, I was riding my. I remember riding up the street up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where my aunt lived. My mother was up visiting my aunt up there. That was her sister, and I was riding on the sidewalk when Aunt Helen and my mother came racing out of the house, and she hollered at me. She said, "Come on in." And I came in. Of course, we didn't have television. It was on the radio, you know. But they were broadcasting over the radio that Pearl Harbor had been bombed, you know. And I had cousins. You know, my mother was, and Aunt Helen were very, very upset because I had two cousins in Pearl Harbor that were Navy people. And one of them got hurt pretty bad in the bombing. That was my cousin Horace, I believe, and he got hurt pretty bad in that bombing. And of course, you know, my mother and my aunt were just really concerned. And my Aunt Helen's husband was a major in the Army, so you know she was pretty upset because it was going to mean war, you know. Because we were going to be at war with Japan over that.
Did they know right away that it was Japan that attacked?
Yeah, they knew it was Japan that attacked, and there'd been some dust up with the President Roosevelt, and because he was a president at that time, and so, but it really didn't affect me too much, you know. I didn't think one way or the other, you know. War didn't seem like it was going to reach out and bother me any. But I remember when it started.
Do you remember much talk about the war as it was going on in the world before Pearl Harbor?
Not much. There wasn't much talk, you know. It was not. There was dissension between Japan and the United States, but there wasn't a lot of discussion of it. It didn't seem to me. But you know, being 7 years old, I didn't pay that much attention to you know, world events. You know, they didn't affect me one way or the other. My main concern was what I was going to get for a snack at 10 o'clock in the morning. You know how that works.
Yeah.
You know, that was my concern. It wasn't the world events.
So did you listen to or watch, I think it was the next day when FDR gave his big speech about it.
Yeah. I didn't watch it, but we saw it on a newsreel.
Yeah.
We saw it on, you know, see, there was no television then, so all you got was the radio. So you could only listen to the radio address. You couldn't, everything was done by radio. You know, they had newsreels, like in the theater, they'd run newsreels where they would bring you up to date on what was going on in the war and what was happening. And I remember seeing it, where they showed him making his speech, because we went to a movie, and they, you know, for a long time after that speech was made, it was still playing in the newsreels, because it was kind of a trying to motivate the people of the United States, you know. But boy, I can remember during the war, oh brother, did our lives ever change. Because we couldn't get anything. I mean, it was, you know, everything was rationed. Gasoline was rationed. You could only get so much gas. You couldn't buy tires for your car. My dad, we had an old 35 Ford, and that 35 Ford My dad bought a set of tires and put on that car, and they lasted for the whole war because we couldn't drive. I mean, we were limited on the amount of driving we could do. You know, farmers got, they had A stamp and a B stamp for, you got stamps sent from the federal government to buy gasoline, and you could only use those stamps in a certain way, and farmers got extra stamps for gasoline, but my dad had to keep records on every bit of gas that he put in the car, every bit of gas he put in the tractors. He had to record everything. It had to be all on record. Now, I don't know that he ever got audited with those records, but he had to have them. I mean, everybody had to keep them. Every farmer had to keep records of what he was using for gas, and so then there were a whole bunch of foodstuffs you couldn't get. I mean, you couldn't get whipping cream. You couldn't, you know, we had milk because we milk cows. You know, my dad did, but it was against the law to even take the cream of your own off the milk. I mean, it was you had to ship the milk, and you had to account for everything. I mean, it was wartime.
Yeah.
You know, and you couldn't buy. No new cars were built from 1941 until 1945. There was a 4-year period where you couldn't buy a car. Maybe you could, but you had to show a hardship, or there's had to be extenuating circumstances for you to even be able to buy a new car, because they weren't manufacturing cars, because they turned all of the manufacturing plants into making tanks and aircraft, and I mean, we were on a wartime footing. I remember I think the General Motors plant in Janesville made some kind of I don't remember exactly what they made, but I think they made something to do with the war, because they shut down all the auto manufacturing companies so that they could get stuff for the war. I tell you, that a wartime footing is not fun. You know, I mean, we just couldn't get sugar. You couldn't get, sometimes you couldn't get flour. Everything went for the armed services. You know, they shipped it all over the world well, it was obviously, it wasn't long we were in war with Germany, so we were going at it on two fronts, and there was just a shortage of everything, and everything was rationed, even food stamps. You had to have food stamps to be able to buy, and we couldn't even butcher our own beef. We raised beef, couldn't butcher it. I mean, because it was against the law. I mean, you had to report everything you had, because we were, you know, it was on a wartime footing. I don't know what we'd do in this country if that came back to this country the way it was in World War II. You know, I remember my mother used to take eggs in, because there were certain times she couldn't get silk stockings. You just couldn't get anything. I mean, even clothing was short, because they were making uniforms, you know, for the servicemen, and it was just a time when everything was centered on that war, you know, and so.
Did anyone try to circumvent the rules?
Well, of course,
yeah.
You know, they had fake stamps being printed. I mean, it's same old.
Yeah.
The world hasn't changed much, John.
So did that affect you guys at all? I mean,
it didn't affect us, because my dad,
or anything?
my dad, you know, my dad was a patriot, and my mother was a patriot, and we followed the rules, you know, and so we lived by the rules. And you even raising stuff in your garden, you had to account for it. Even if you had a garden, you just had to account for everything.
So did any family or friends end up joining the Army or anything after Pearl Harbor?
Oh yeah, there were a lot of them.
A lot of people you know?
Oh yeah, yeah. A lot of people went. A lot of people. I tell you, the guys were just lined up to. I tell
Were
you,
they being forced to? Was it the draft? Or
well,
did they
no,
volunteer?
no, really. Well, there was a draft. There was a draft in place, but they had people that weren't in the draft just volunteering. They had young people trying to get into the Army and Navy that were underage. You know, they'd lie about their age to try to get in and help fight the war. There was a tremendous morale coming together. I tell you, you know, the today, the environment today, I don't know how in the world we if we had to fight a war like that today, I don't know how in the world we would do it. Because boy, I tell you, there was a coming together for, and you know, being a United States citizen, there was a level of pride, John, that is really missing in our country today. You know, a level of pride of being an American. And I'll tell you, there was no shortage of people wanting to participate. Women, men all went to fight, you know. So the women ran the places where they were manufacturing. That's where, you know, they coined the term Rosie the Riveter, because there were so many women that were working in the manufacturing plants, putting out the equipment that they needed. I mean, everybody just put their shoulder to the wheel and made it work. You know, little do people realize today the price that was paid by not only the soldiers that went, but the people that stayed behind and really worked to supply everything they needed. And, you know, our country, it seems to me, is that level of dedication to our nation is missing today. You know, it was just remarkable. That's all. I mean, everybody everybody was ready to serve in whatever capacity they needed to serve. And you know, there wasn't a lot of complaints. It was rough. I remember it. You know, I don't ever remember going without food, you know, or being hungry, because my mother really worked. But it was work. It was hard work to just put food on the table, because it was so hard to make it work. So hard to make it work. Mm-hmm. I remember, interesting. Every so often we would go to Milwaukee. My dad, near the end of the war, we would save up our stamps and take the old 35 Ford, and we'd go to Milwaukee, because he liked to go to a place in Milwaukee to eat, and we never ate out. I mean, eating out, oh, that's another thing. You couldn't buy ice cream, you couldn't buy dairy products, whipping cream, and the you know, they started making sherbet in the war, because you made it out of water. You know, you didn't make that out of dairy. And I never cared that much for sherbet, but you got so you could get a little vanilla in a pint of ice cream. You could buy a pint of ice cream, and it had a little bit of vanilla in the middle, and then sherbet all the way around it. So we used to buy that, and we thought that was just great, you know. Mm-hmm. But we went to Milwaukee the day the war ended, when we happened to be in Milwaukee. We went in there, and nobody knew that it was going to end right at that particular time, you know. So we went to Milwaukee, and I remember we got into Milwaukee, and we got downtown Milwaukee, and that's where we were, downtown, when the news came through that the war was over. And people poured out of the stores, they poured into the streets, they filled the streets, and they were hooting and hollering and hugging and kissing, and I mean, it was just something. it was just amazing to me, you know, because I was about, oh, I don't know, probably, well, let's see, in 1945, I would have been 11, you know, because I was born in 34, and 11, yeah, it would be 45. When the war ended in 1945, we happened to be in there, and my sister and I and Mom and Dad went in, and it was something else. Those soldiers, and there were soldiers and sailors in there, because they'd get on leave, and then they'd come home, and they might be there, you know, they'd be on a furlough, and it was just bedlam. I remember we were down on Wisconsin Avenue, when at that time, that was the main route through Milwaukee, and we were right downtown. And I never saw so many people in my life. They came in and they were tooting. You'd think that, well, I don't know. I guess it was such a wonderful thing that the war ended, that because it had been such a battle, you know, and you had to go without everything, and all of a sudden it was a new day, the war was ending, and there would be peace, you know. And these people were just acting nuts. I mean, they just went off their rockers when that ended. And I never forgot that. You know, we were walking downtown, and there were people grabbing my mother and giving her a hug, and she didn't know what to do. You know, I mean, if you were we were out on the street right with them, you know,
Yeah.
because we had gone downtown. Well, you couldn't drive anywhere because our car was downtown, you know, and you couldn't get out of town because, you know, that was the main hub. We were right in the main hub of Milwaukee, right smack in the middle of it. And the people, you know, and so my dad says, well, I guess we're stuck for a while. I don't remember what his response was, but of course he was so delighted that the war was over. I mean, he was glad. You know, everybody was just, there was just a euphoria, you know, like I've never seen when that war ended. You know, it's kind of like the Cubs winning the World Series in downtown Chicago, you know. It was just a spectacular thing. And then things started to improve. But, you know, even the rationing was over, but still there was a lot of shortage because there had been so many manufacturing facilities that had changed over to building equipment for the Army and equipment for the Marines, and, you know, everything that they had to build guns, they had to build shells, they had to build jeeps, you know, they had and tanks and trucks, and I mean there was so much of that being done that it took them quite a while to it was 1946 before they even started manufacturing cars again, because they had to convert those plants back to so the last year that you could, the last year of cars manufactured, I think there were some 1942 models, but mostly it was 1941, and then it moved 5 years forward to 1946. So if you ever buy an old car, you'll never buy a 1943 or a 1944 or a 1945 automobile, because they weren't made. They were never built, because we were on a wartime footing, and so there are those models. You know, you come up through all the models from 1930 to 35 to 40, but then when you get to 41, that's the end of it, and then 46 it starts up again.
So with it starting when you were 7, and having to ration everything and pull back on everything, was that much different from how your childhood was being in the 30s, partly during the Great Depression? Was it kind of similar to that, or did you
it was worse than that.
The Great Depression was worse?
No, the wartime was worse. Because because in the 1930s, in the Depression, you see, my dad, I think he told me that they got about 50 cents for a 10-gallon can of milk in the Depression. Hogs sold for about $2 a hundredweight, and so I mean the Depression was very bad from the standpoint of earning money. I mean, there was an awful lot of people that were homeless, and they couldn't find any work. They couldn't get any pay. I mean, the Depression was awful, you know, when it happened. You know, we talk about, you know, a few years ago how things went, and we got into, people called it a depression, and I said they don't know what they're talking about. The Depression was the Depression, and nothing to equal it in my estimation. Of course, I was pretty young. You know, I was really young, because the Depression was winding down when I was born. You know, so I never remember the real Depression, because it was over before, because it happened in '29, you know, when the stock market fell, and then it was 5 years later before I was born. So I don't remember any of that. But
so were things kind of on the way back?
Yeah, they were on the way back, you
Mm-hmm.
know. But I never was concerned about getting enough to eat up until the war, because in the war, so many things, you couldn't make anything. You know, my mother, you know, we were farmers. We got a little stuff that other people didn't get, but we couldn't. We had to account for everything, you know, that we raised, almost. I mean, it's hard to understand that everything you're doing has to be accounted for, because, and of course a lot of people cheated, you know, and I suppose in the truest sense of the word, my dad and mother they probably cheated a little too, you know, because you know, they tried to feed their family. So, but that was really hard time.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing I'd experienced up to that, because you know, we were short of money, and we didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up. But as far as you know, feeling the effects of not having money, you didn't feel it until it got to be wartime. And then it wasn't not having the money, it's just that
You just weren't allowed to use it?
you just couldn't spend it on anything.
Yeah.
Couldn't buy anything. It wasn't that you didn't have the money, you couldn't spend it on anything. You had to account for it.
So what was kind of the next big event after World War II?
Well, I guess, as far as I'm concerned, I guess it was when Eisenhower was elected president. I thought that was quite a thing, you know.
And that was 50...
Oh, I don't
was
remember.
it 52?
No, I don't remember when it was. I don't remember the year, you know, that he was elected president, but it was quite a thing. Harry Truman was president after Franklin Roosevelt was, and and then Dwight Eisenhower was really revered by the people of the country. I mean, he was just really looked up to, because he was the general, of course, that ended the world, you know, that guided the Normandy invasion and guided the end of the war in Germany. And the bigger war, you know, it was Eisenhower and MacArthur, and a lot of people wanted General MacArthur to run for president, but he never did. But Eisenhower, I just always really thought he was pretty special, you know. And then when he got elected, that was quite a thing.
Did you vote for him? Were you old enough to vote for him?
No, I wasn't old enough to vote
No.
for him. I think my folks did, but I wasn't old enough. So, but he was just really looked up to, you know, as a person, you know. He was just special, you know.
The biggest thing I remember about Eisenhower, or just hearing about him, is the interstate system.
Yeah.
So I know he was known for that. Were there other things he did or
Well,
was known
that
for?
I don't probably, but that's the
That's
one
the
that
big one.
really stands out
Mhm.
because and he wanted that, and that was one of the things he really wanted to get done in this country, because he wanted the ability in the event of war to be able to move equipment fast anywhere in the United States. He wanted it to be able to get where we might have to fight a war in this country, because his whole philosophy was it's peace by strength, you know, and so be prepared, you know. And so his whole philosophy was you get this interstate system, and then he said we've got 4 lanes, and you can shut the cars off, you can shut people off from being on the interstate, and you can move equipment across the country pretty fast on those interstates because you've got the roads to do it. You've got 4 lanes available to you. You can have them all going in the same direction to head to a war and shut the people off from using them.
So before there were interstates, were there just the?
There were just the
just
normal
county
roads.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it took a while to get places.
Oh yeah, it took a while to get places.
Yeah.
Boy, I tell you what, when the interstates started opening up, that was really something else. That really was something else. I remember that when they started opening those interstates, and people started moving around. You know, and to this day, you know, it's really made a big difference. You know, the interstates started the demise of the rail system in this country.
Yeah.
Because the ability to get quickly to move commerce became apparent with those interstates, and then, you know, they could go to where they couldn't run a railroad everywhere, so they had those interstates, and they made more and more. Of course, they've added many interstates over the years because they were so effective in moving stuff. You know, normally, I don't remember what they had for the beginning ones. I don't know where it started. I think it started in the east. They started building them, you know. Well, they had to build them clear across the country. And but boy, oh boy, when they saw how commerce could move, you know, the interstate system has just caused the demise of the rail system in this country. Because, you know, our rail system is behind a lot of other countries, in my estimation. You know, it seems to me like we are not rail minded like we are truck minded, you know, to move commerce by trucks, you know.
Do you remember who the first president was that you voted for?
Oh, gee, I don't remember. I can't remember who. I really don't know. I can't remember who the first one was.
Did you vote every time that you were able to vote?
Oh yeah.
For every president?
Yeah, I've always voted. And I haven't always voted one party either. You know, I have voted some Democratic and some Republican because I thought there were good people on both sides.
Yeah.
But it seems like it's changed a little through the years, but
so what else kind of happened in the 50s that was big? Was that when the Korean War was towards the end of the 50s?
Yeah, well, the Korean War was going on when I graduated from high school, and of course I actually went to Milwaukee because I was drafted.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I went to Milwaukee, took a physical, and then I got what they called a 5F deferment because of my dad's health, so I could stay. They left the boys home on the farm if they had a really good reason for being home. And of course my dad's health was so bad that they gave me a deferment for farming. to leave me home, and so I just stayed home and farmed because my dad didn't want me to go to service and leave the farm without anybody to operate it.
Yeah.
So,
Was Grandma pretty thankful for that you didn't have to
well,
go and do anything?
I suppose she was. You know, I suppose every mother is. You know that if they don't have to, I was ready to go if it was required. You know, but it just seemed like at the time that, of course, here again, you know, when I graduated from high school, I needed to go home, and then I married, when I married your grandma in the fall, why that further enhanced, because they were deferring on the basis of young men being married, but I got married because my mother wanted to go to Florida, and of course I was ready to get married. I wanted to be married anyway, and so everything all worked out,
Yeah.
you know, from there on.
Were there any similarities from World War II to when the Korean War was going on? Were there any rationing or anything like that?
No, it never developed. There might have been some shortages during the Korean War, but not much.
Mm-hmm.
It was nothing like World War II. Nothing. I mean, it was. But of course, the scale of requirement for World War II was unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, you think about the amount of guns and trucks and everything, stuff getting blown up and destroyed, and planes being shot down, you know, and having to be rebuilt, more planes, you know. It was, you know, there was so much required equipment in World War II versus other wars, because, you know, we have fought regional wars, but that was a world war, you know. It was going on all over the world, you know, or it seemed like it.
Mm-hmm.
And in an awful lot of, there were a few neutral places where war wasn't going on, but for the most part, war was pretty well covering all of Europe and England and the you know, the where the Japan and all those islands were, and out there, and I don't know what they call that, not the Far East, I don't know, Asia, I guess the Asian war,
Yeah.
you know, was going on at that time.
So in the early 60s is when JFK was elected.
Yeah.
That, looking back on it, we're kind of told that he was kind of revolutionary in his thoughts as to politics and all that. Was that what it was like?
Yeah. He was highly thought of after he got into office. You know, he was pretty highly thought of, and I remember the day he got shot. You know, and the country was really in mourning when he got shot. You know, he was the president of the United States. The office of the president has deteriorated in its respect, I think.
In the way that we as the country respect the president?
Yeah. It's just like, it seems like, you know, if they elected a Democrat, the country got behind him. If they elected a Republican, the country got behind him. But today, you know, it just seems like there's just the office of the president just doesn't seem to have the respect that it used to have. There's just, at least it doesn't seem to me like there's a sense of patriotism like there used to be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there used to be a lot there, you know, the patriotism of the country, it seems to me, has deteriorated. You know, there's so much more today anti-United States rhetoric out there. Boy, you never heard that. I mean, everybody was glad to be an American years ago, and that's kind of started to go. But you know, they've taken God out of everything, and if you take God out of everything, people don't have any foundation. It seems to me. I mean, they just don't have what they need. You know, people need the Lord. People need to have that foundation, and that they don't have. You know.
So what were you doing when you found out that he had been shot?
We were carpeting our house. I remember we had moved into the house from the mobile home out on the farm. My folks had moved to the mobile home out in the backyard because that's where your grandma and I lived for quite a while after we were married, in that mobile home. Well, then we decided we were going to take over the house, and my folks moved into the mobile home, so we just switched places. But when we went into the house, why, the carpeting was just really bad. And I remember the day we were listening to there were people there laying carpet, and we were laying carpet in the living room when the news came through that Kennedy had been shot. And of course that was big time. I mean, you just don't forget where you are when that happens. I don't remember where I was when Reagan got shot, but I do remember where I was what I was doing when Kennedy got shot.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a sad day, I'll tell you, for our country, and it was a sad day for our people. The fact that to shoot a president, I don't care what his beliefs are. You may not agree with them all, but boy, I tell you what, to destroy a human being because he's trying to be a decent person is that's pretty radical in my estimation.
Was there a sense of fear of the unknown, of what was going to come after that, if there were going to be more attacks?
Well, a little bit, but of course the United States has established itself. Lyndon Johnson, of course, was the vice president, and we had television then, so we could watch it. We could watch the events on television, and I saw Lyndon Johnson. It was streamed live, and I saw Lyndon Johnson take the oath of office on. I think he was on a plane coming back to Washington.
Yep.
When he took the oath of office, and
did they show the footage right away of Kennedy being shot?
They showed it pretty quick.
They did?
Yeah. Of course, you see there were cameras right there catching everything.
Mm-hmm.
So they actually had the images of him slumping over. I mean, they actually caught that, and of course it was streamed on the news. That was just an awful thing, And then I remember we watched when they had the funeral and watched, his wife and those two little kids marching behind the I don't know what they call those things, where they draw them with a horse. It's not a hearse. It's I forget what they call them, but it was a pretty sad sight, to see something like that. You just think, well, that can't happen in the United States, but it does. It does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And now everyone's always either on one side or the other, that it was Lee Harvey Oswald that shot him, or
some conspiracy.
Or a conspiracy. Was there any talk of that as it
happened?
Yes.
Oh, my goodness, yes. It went on for a long time. They had the Warren Commission because Earl Warren was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and they had a special commission. I don't remember all the details, but they really dug into it to see if there was any more. And of course, there's been conspiracy theories through the years, and there some still going on,
Yeah.
But nobody, I don't think anybody ever established any more than, that Lee Harvey Oswald shot him, and I don't think anybody's ever really established a conspiracy, but it's just a sad event for our country, But here again, the country rallied. I mean, you take, it's just kind of like 9/11, the country there are times when the country will come together. you know, you'll have a few stragglers, but for the most part, the country unites around serious events like that, you know, and so.
So, in the '60s, was there anything else big in the '60s? I know in '69 when we landed on the moon.
Yeah.
I was trying to think if there's anything else.
Yeah, I remember watching that. You know, where that was a big deal. You know, landing on the moon, and of course that was all televised. You know, so it was quite an event to watch that. You know.
How long did it take from when they lifted off to getting to the moon? Was it a couple days?
I don't remember how long it took. Yeah, I think it probably. It might have even have been longer than a couple days. You know, it might have. I can't remember the length of time. All I remember is when they got into the orbit around the moon, and then they took that little machine that they had to run around on the moon and set it down. You know, I remember. Yeah, it was streamed live. You know that. One small step for humanity, one small step for man, and one giant step for humanity. You know,
yeah,
those famous words that they spoke.
So, with that being the first time man being on the moon, was there a big sense of just uncertainty if everything was going to work and if they were going to get back to Earth and all that?
Well, there was always a concern that everything was going to work to get them back. You know.
Yeah.
You know, I think it was. When the shuttle exploded, that they, you know, I remember the day the shuttle exploded, when they took off from Cape Canaveral.
Which one was that? Was that?
That's the one where that teacher was on board. I forget her name.
Sally Ride. Is that who it was?
No, it wasn't her. If you said the name, I'd remember it.
Was that in '85, the Challenger?
Yeah, that was the first one that blew up. They had the 5 on there, and that teacher from, I think she was from somewhere in Massachusetts or somewhere. She was the first non-astronaut that went into space. And fact of the matter is, I had a friend of mine that was at my condo in Florida and saw the explosion. When it exploded, and it really was quite a thing, you know, and it didn't, you know, it was really a shock to the country, but you know that I remember. I don't know whether it was John Glenn or some of the other astronauts that said that it was going to happen. He had made the prediction because they were advancing the space program so fast that he said that they're going to make a mistake. I mean, it was just they'd done it so many times safely. I mean, you do it so many times safely that it becomes a mundane thing, and so I don't say they let down their guard of carefulness, being careful, you know, but it was always thought that they were pushing the program along a little fast, and they sent that shuttle into orbit on a day when it was cold. And the O-rings, that's what they said, just an O-ring that didn't hold, and it caused the explosion. That's what we heard anyway. But you know, you don't know all the facts. You don't know what really caused it, but it was sure a sad thing to see that shuttle explode. They showed those pictures over and over again. You know, they still show them. I mean, you go down there to a movie. You go to a movie, and they show that explosion. It was a pretty sad thing, you know, to see that thing go. And
what was the Cold War like?
The Cold War, I think we were more concerned about it than we really needed to be. but I remember when the Berlin Wall came down with Reagan, and when he got Gorbachev to tear down the wall. That was a big deal.
Yeah, it was kind of the culmination of all those years. Standoffs.
Yeah, and boy, I tell you, the stories that came out of that, true stories of people trying to get over the wall, trying to get past, trying to get on the other side in Berlin. I remember at the end of World War II when they divided up Berlin into the East and West. It was pretty sad, to see that wall go up and people couldn't travel back and forth, and I tell you, the governments that oppress the people really, they really do, they really make life miserable for people. It's just really, and there were families that were split at that time. It's kind of like if they came and built a wall across the United States and said you can't go the other side. Well, maybe some of my family would be on the other side, and they hadn't seen him in years, and some had never seen him. You think about that. It doesn't touch you, so it doesn't really sink in. But boy, to some of those people that tried to, they were killed trying to get out of Russia and across, or get out of Berlin and get over into the West Berlin area and get out. It was, and for a lot of people, there were a lot of bunkers built in the ground and things because, as the atomic age started to develop and the Russians got atomic weapons and the United States, we didn't know, but what, they try to blow up Chicago or, to try to come over here and so it was a scary time, and it's always been amazing to me how accurate the Word of God is in connection with that there will be wars and rumors of wars, and it's ongoing. It never will end. And boy, I tell you, as long as people people are in sin and they live in that mode, and so what can you expect? There's always somebody trying to get the best of somebody else, a nation trying to get the best of another nation, and on and on and on. Yeah. I can remember 9/11. I was at home when 9/11 hit. You probably remember where you were.
Yeah, I was in 8th grade Bible class down at Rock County Christian.
Yeah, and I suppose they started broadcasting it.
Yeah, it was so early in the morning. It was 8 or 8:30.
Yeah, it was 8:30 in the morning when the first plane hit. And I didn't think those towers would come down. I thought they would hold, but boy, when they came down, it's hard to fathom something. We can't. I don't know whether you've ever been like downtown Chicago and seen the tall buildings, but you look at a building that's 40, 50, 60 stories tall, and you think, man, there's a lot up there. And if that thing starts coming down, boy, and that's, I'm not even sure that the people that flew those planes into those towers thought that they would do as effectively as they did, but of course they never knew. They get killed instantly when they flew the plane into them. But it was really effective in bringing it down, And here again, that was another time when the country gathered together. And so, I can remember we were out the night that Richard Nixon resigned from the presidency.
Oh yeah, what was that like?
Well, that was kind of a scary event. We were out. Your grandma, Brian, Leah, and Jim, and I were out in Cape Cod having a lobster dinner the night that he resigned. we it was the funniest thing. We were sitting in this restaurant right on the water, and it was a highly acclaimed lobster joint, and I don't remember what the name of it was, but it was right on Cape Cod, and we were sitting at the table, and all of a sudden, the whole restaurant just cleared, and all the people were all gathered around a little television at the restaurant, and we didn't even know what was going on. And then all of a sudden, the waiter came up and said, the president has resigned and he's leaving the White House. So up we got, and we went over and took a look too, you know.
Was there much build up to that?
Not a lot. There, of course, that, you know, the Watergate thing had been a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And it was building up, but, you know, nobody really was sure that the president, nobody, you know, for a president to resign, that's pretty unusual, you know, obviously. So when he resigned, well, it was quite an event, you know. And of course, there were people saying, cheering, "Yay, got him out," you know, and other people were disappointed, you know. I mean, that, you know how that goes. And but he was. I remember they showed the picture of him getting on the, and it was streaming live, you know, getting on the helicopter and taking off from the south lawn of the White House. Mm-hmm. So it's been a lot of events, John, take place. And there'll be a lot more, you know.
Did you pay attention to, participate in pop culture stuff much? Like, did you listen to or go see concerts or Elvis or the Beatles or anything like that?
Nothing.
Nothing?
None of that really. Yeah, I was so heavily involved in church. You know, from the time I was saved back in 1959. Right up till the present day, you know, my life and the life of my family has pretty much revolved around church. And so none of that type of thing, you know, we'd go to movies. For years, we didn't go to any movies because that was Hollywood and that was sin. So we just didn't do that, you know. But you know, later on, we go to movies, and of course I get movies now, but as far as getting involved in the concerts, you know, we went to Milwaukee once to to Summerfest, you know, and that was okay, but it didn't really do a lot for me for what. A lot of people really got into that stuff, you know, they really like that. Mm-hmm. That's fine. You know, to each his own. Everybody can get involved in what they want to, but my life pretty well through my life has revolved around the Lord and revolved around, you know, Christian activities, you know, so just never did that.
So if you wanted a fun night or you wanted to be entertained, what did you go and do?
Oh, yeah, you know, a lot of times we'd go play cards. You know, we'd play cards, play games. Enjoyed that, you know. I remember I used to play chess. Never did like checkers, but I used to play chess a lot and liked that game. And so we'd do that. We'd play 500 and we played a lot of rook, you know, of course, when we were coming up through Christians, because as Christians, why you know, one of the things you kind of didn't do is play a lot of cards, you know, and so we didn't play much cards, and but I don't know, you know, when you're raising a family, when you know you got 6 kids, and in 9 years you have your social life is pretty limited.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you're just pretty much, the effort that you put forth is pretty much directed at the family.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, there's and you know, when we were in high school, or when our kids were in high school, why, you know, there was a lot of activities that they were involved in, and I used to wonder how in the world them kids ever learned anything when they were all the time involved in activities, you know. But they did, and they learned, and they were involved in their activities. And so,
were there any other big events? I'm trying to think if there are any other big national or worldwide events.
No, I can't think of any really that really stand out as far as, you know, 9/11 was certainly the biggest one in recent times. I don't remember what, you know, I remember when the Korean or the Vietnam War ended, and I remember the people trying to get out of Vietnam. That was a pretty scary event, you know, where they were trying to. You could see the people trying to hang on the helicopters and the natives and that, because they were taking the Americans out at the tail end, because the North Koreans or the North Vietnamese were coming down through, and they were pretty close to Seoul. No, was it Seoul? That's South Korea.
Yeah,
that's South Korea. I'm trying to think of the name of the city where they were in the South Vietnamese, the main city there.
Is it Ho Chi Minh City?
No, that was the north.
Was it?
Ho Chi Minh City was in the North Vietnamese. Can't think of the name of that town. But that was a scary event. Him getting out of Korea.
It seems like everyone looks back on
getting out of Vietnam.
Yeah, on the Vietnam War, and just says that it was mishandled and just kind of a bungled war. Is that kind of the feeling as it was going on?
Well, yeah, the limitation that was put on our servicemen and our Air Force at that time was always looked upon as being we were fighting a limited war. If we had been able to really go at North Vietnam, and I don't know what, there was some reason why we didn't really go in and invade and bomb North Vietnam. I think the war could have turned out differently, but I think we were fighting a limited engagement there, where we just had our hands tied behind it. It's kind of like, from what I've heard anyway, the limitation that has been put on our service people over in the Far East, you know, where they can't fight, or they're going to be. It's loosening up now, but during the previous administration, it's you know, you hear about the fact that they can't really fight the way they need to fight to really get on top of things over there. But the problem is with us over here, we have to, our intelligence in our minds has to be governed by what we hear, you know, and you can't be sure that everything you hear is accurate, or if it is accurate, how accurate, you know. Maybe some of it may be accurate, but some may not. So it's hard to make a judgment call, you know.